But behind every KPI is a process that's key. And you find out what about that process that if you made it faster, or you made it more reliable, or you were able to get better quality and maintain and make the safety better, what would that be? And I think that's, the steps that we look at is first is it going to make the job safer? Can it make the job faster? Can it make it so one person can do it when two are required and do it safely, right? And then can the technology do something that humans can't?
And welcome everybody to Equality Podcast Season 2. We're pleased to have with us today Sean Driscoll. Sean is the president of Driscoll Organizational Solutions. And Sean wants to talk to us today about a very interesting topic that is close to Jake and I, which is people-centered technology improvements. So we all know the horror stories about implementing technology that really doesn't help, and Jake and I have been on the receiving end of that pretty hardcore. So when Sean reached out to us, we said, this is it. Love to have this conversation. Sean, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good deal. So Sean, for our listeners out there, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and your company and set some context?
Sure. So this is Driscoll Organizational Solutions. We work on change enablement. So it's not just a cookie cutter approach or templates to helping people manage change, but helping them to set up the environment so that they can be successful and get into sensing changes coming down. So, we believe that once you write it down, then you're limited. And there's a point where you have to commit. But why walk into a situation without first understanding the people, the culture, what technology they use, and what capital they have available? Then after that point, then we get into, okay, so what's our approach?
I really like that approach, Sean, because it's a little more intuitive and frankly intelligent. Of course, I did the, CPM or whatever training many years ago, and have managed some projects, and the cookie cutter approach, it just doesn't work. By the time your document and model gets complex enough to kind of deal with the real world, it's too cumbersome to even use, right? Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit more about your approach to helping organizations change and improve.
So we want to understand why they want to change. So is it outside forces internally? Right now, a lot of businesses are having a hard time with staffing, finding people to man the equipment or to do the processes, whether it's applications or some sort of information processing. And so we want to understand what's the value that they have. I'm working with a multi-billion-dollar company that I asked them, what kind of business are you? And I narrowed it down to, are you a sales company? Are you an engineering company? Or are you a manufacturing company? And I didn't get agreement. And so they've been in business for decades, and they still don't understand what kind of business they are. And I'm being a little facetious when I say that, but I think that's really important because you determines where the expertise lies, right? So if you're a sales company, that's going to really wag the dog from engineering and manufacturing standpoint. You've got to be prepared for that. And then just throwing robotics or throwing robotic process automation, RPAs at stuff because it's not going well. We all know that just makes waste faster. And so we want to get to what the value is that people are supposed to be creating, fit, form, and function, whether it's information or a product. And then we have something centered on. Then we have something we can start building off of. And then when you talk to the people who do the work, you ask them about the process, and they're like, what's a process? Well, it's just a word to describe the group of activities you do to get a certain effect, right? So how do you know when you hand this off that it's good? And it's interesting, the conversations you have, because everybody's got their own kind of different way of determining if it's good enough to hand to the next person. It's kind of like throwing that ball down the lane. You grimace, you're not going to get a strike. So people doing the work, actually creating the value, understand that, whether they have the words for it or not. So that's really important to us. And it seems like you're going slow, and a lot of leaders don't like that. But I tell them you got to go slow to go fast. And so let's get this.
I love it. So why do you think, like, I don't know if this is anecdotal or there's some statistics there, why do you think we continue to see technology deployed that doesn't make the employee's life any better?
Well, because some people have been successful for it, right? So they have some stories to tell, but unfortunately, those are far and few between. And it's kind of like the urban legends; they just get repeated over and over, and they get bigger and bigger. And like, look, they're using AI. And it's like, well, there's really no such thing as AI yet, right? So we still need subject matter experts. IBM's Watson requires SMEs around the world to help feed it the right information to give the right answers. Yeah, so I think it's people, somebody bragging on the golf course or somewhere about, hey, we got this in place and we're getting these results. Well, they may, but how did they get there? That's more important.
Yeah. So what's your approach whenever you come into an agreement? You're just doing some discovery, and there's already technology in place that directly does not, suit the value proposition. What is that approach? What do you do? What actions and context do you take there?
Well, so I ran into this problem a couple of years ago. It was a big pharma packaging line, and they just kept adding sensors to stuff, and they had this dashboard, and they were measuring everything. And engineering kind of took over production. So that was the first thing to have a conversation: is who owns production? Well, production does. So engineers come out, they need to ask permission to shut the machines down. They don't schedule the machines, right? So you got to keep your eye on what the customer delivery is. What does the customer want? And then to look at what problems were they having. And so at this point, it came down to talking to the person in charge of operations. And I said, you're part of the problem. And he literally took a misstep when he heard that. And he's like, okay. I said, because everybody goes out there and they want to fix it. And so they touch it and they change it, right? And then you have people who think it's an art. And so they're tweaking stuff, even though things are going well. So let's just get the OEMs in and set it the way they had designed the piece of equipment and run it from there and see what happens. And then we start looking at when the problem happens, let's trace it back to the root cause. So it was really kind of slow for them because they were spending money having vendors and engineers and more sensors added on and all this other stuff. And when we got to that point, it became very clear that the solution was a lot easier than they thought. And it really, a couple of them was, it was the supplier. They said that the cardboard was coming in at specification, but found out they were putting it on the top shelf in the warehouse of a 30-foot warehouse in the middle of summer, and the humidity levels weren't there. And so the cardboard wasn't behaving like it was supposed to, and it was crashing when it got into the machine. I mean, just those kind of basic things. But when you start muddying the waters, it's hard to see clearly what's going on. So yeah, it's getting and making things clearer, right? So it's just saying, okay, this is what's important. That's not, right? So souping that up or making that faster is not going to help.
Yeah, I love it. So on the one hand, we have companies that are sort of playing the lottery, right? Like, well, this company did it. They had good results. Let's roll the dice and see, what happens. I took a class on ERP implementation. I can't remember the statistics. This was like 2012, but I want to say successful ERP implementation rate was like 7%. And so, of course, the question was, well, then why the hell does anybody do this? And, all the professor could say was, well, if it does work, there's a lot of rewards,
I think lottery is a good word to describe that.
Right. So we have people playing the lottery. And then, as you pointed out, the approach that some organizations take to technology, because it lacks an organizational structure, like a business operating system to guide the implementation of the technology, such as a PDCA cycle or whatever your tool of choice. Too many fingers in the pie, right? I've seen that a lot as well. So issues, right? And you're sort of saying that people-centered technology improvements is kind of the foundation or prerequisite to really getting what you want out of your technology. And I guess for me, when I hear these conversations and engage, I keep bumping up against this thing, right, where it seems like there's just giant chunks of the business world that are consumed with the idea of technology for technology's sake. I know there's people that make a living selling technology, so we're going to ignore them. Obviously, they are selling technology, right? But I'm talking about Walmart, right? Just a company that's not in the tech space, but you'll have business leaders, and I've heard in board meetings and high level management meetings, we need more technology. Mm-hmm. Really? You're obviously jumping to a solution, right? What's the actual problem? So can you talk a little bit about problem identification, how technology might help, and the difference between people-centered technology versus technology for technology's sake?
Yeah, so when we look at the why, we want to hear the voice of the customer. So what is the customer saying? How are they using the product or service or the information that's provided? And then we look also at the financials and the metrics, the measures of success for the company. And that does point us to the direction that probably needs the most attention. And like any problem, there's usually more than one root cause, right? And they just kind of compound each other. And so, the approach is, okay, so, and here's the thing is, it's kind of like these prepackaged things, right? So lean, I think some people's definition of lean is good. A lot of people's is not, because there's no standard for it, right? It's actually just kind of a label of these things from an MIT study on Toyota that they tried to say, what can we pull from this, right? So when people say, well, we've got some waste in this process, or we've got long lead times, they're like, well, let's just do lean. It's like, well, what exactly are you trying to fix? So that gets to people using technology for technology's sake. Well, why don't we just get a automated baggage handling system so that the ticket agents can take it and put it on the belt, and it'll show up at the plane and everything will be all right? Well, the problem is that Colorado tried that at one time, and they spent like $1 billion. It was like 20 years ago. Never got it working. Never. They had some really major issues with it. It's just too complex of a system. But it sounded nice, right? And somebody was able to sell them on that system. But the variables are too much, right? So there's too many things going on, too many initial conditions. And so instead of trying to come up with all the algorithms necessary to decide what a human would do, because you'll never get there, right? There's always stuff to come up, is put the person and find out how you can keep them doing what they do best and not have to worry about all the other stuff. And that's a much better approach, because you'll get down to where, like, the surgeon just shows up, starts the operation, sutures up, needles up the person, and then they walk out and they go to the next operating room, and they do that over and over again, right? Instead of them laying out the tools or directing people to lay out the instruments and those type of things. It's the same thing in the office. Why should people have to go hunt for information? Why isn't it at their fingertips? I think if people look at that, you're going to get a lot further. You're going to have a lot better quality. You're going to shorten your lead times, and it's going to cost a lot less to do what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have seen a lot of this. I don't know how to phrase it. Maybe I'm going to take a stab at a phrase and say it's like Band-Aid jingle, where we're sitting here creating an extra customized solution to solve one problem for the business on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other, until what you have is you have a process so convoluted, it doesn't even make sense to the people that are doing it. And like the clarity is just absolutely gone. And then when we go the route of bringing new technology in, it's usually just one of those Band-Aids we're actually trying to fix without understanding any of the other pretense that went into that. So I like that approach to start from understanding the why. Really well said. In an earlier comment that I fell in love with and wanted to start a conversation around was when you said the employees having a signal to do work. And I definitely worked in a warehouse in tandem with John here in a galaxy far, far away, where I went to put together the most complicated swim lane possible of exactly what the processes were. And there were not one, but two spots where there was no signal for an employee to do the next thing. And just periodic checks had to take place to do that. So I love that that's something you're checking for in your process. If you could give us just a little more detail on how you identify that when you're brand new to an organization, walking through the door to transform the place.
Yeah, that old value stream technique of starting from the shipping dock and working your way up is, what feeds this spot, and what's that trigger, and you look for that. So it's not just not the value flow, but it's also the information flow around that, and that's really important. So how do people know that they need to work on this? Is it because all of a sudden it piles up and they can't get to that part of their desk or that part of the shop floor? So yeah, I think it's really important that you follow and you just really get to that, what some people call the critical path, right? So if I really have to get this thing out, what are the steps I have to go through to make sure it's got the fit, form, function, quality, cost, and on time. And then you really determine. I had a Air Force colonel who was working aircraft maintenance, and he took the approach of he took everything out of the hangar, and he brought an aircraft in and said, "Okay, we need to do an isochronal inspection, which is a timed inspection, so many flight hours." And they started bringing in only the stuff they needed. And then they had this big square out on the tarmac of all this stuff that was just sitting around that they didn't need. So it's really getting to that. Accountants call it zero-based budgeting, which could be useful, but I think that's the other thing too, is things become a fad. Like everybody wants to do zero-based budgeting now, or everybody wants to do this or that. And because they don't want to look at the business. I don't understand that, to open their eyes and say, well, you really have the answers here, right? You don't need to go outside. You have the answers here. And once you understand the processes and people and technology a little bit better, so then when you do go outside, you know exactly what you want. Someone's not going to sell you all the bells and whistles. That same story of the aircraft maintenance, they wanted that. Now they got this down where they, got the hangar and everything set up the way they need to do these inspections as quickly as possible. They're like, well, we need to schedule the aircraft better, because they were just using the old method of a board and chalked lines, and magnets and stuff like that. And they talked to the consultants and they wanted to sell them a $2 million package to schedule aircraft for maintenance. And we're like, you can use a spreadsheet, don't go from pen and paper all the way to this, And so they went back to the company saying, I think we're going to use a spreadsheet. We even developed the spreadsheet for them. And it was, we had the macros and all that stuff, just make it a little bit easier for them. And the company's like, well, we'll sell it to you for $1 million. And the colonel right then and there, he's like, you guys, who drops their price by 50%, right? So he knew that, the jig was up. So,
yes. Well, a good summary of that, just a PSA for the audience, is if you believe in silver bullets, it also means you believe in werewolves by default. So there is no silver bullets. Get out there and learn your business.
Yeah, I like that story. I have something similar. I was working with a warehouse that was in the middle of the automotive supply chain, and everyone up and downstream used SAP, and this facility used SAP as well. And they were having some issues with velocity. So in automotive, your velocities have to be pretty high. So I'm out there walking the shipping dock, and this is where it starts, because they're running late on their orders, which is an expensive proposition in Tier 1 automotive. So this employee has a trailer, they're loading it, and there's like these loading bays, and I can just look down the dock and see like, okay, the next two trailers to go out are here and here. Like they're basically full. The loading bay is full. And the employee goes halfway across the building to this computer terminal and spends 17 minutes there. So after, once I was after the 15-minute mark, I just walked over there. Like, this is really interesting because, I'm under the impression you're a loader. What's going on here? And what was going on was, the company had paid for one license for one computer for everyone to share. And anyone who's used SAP knows that, it's not the most user-friendly interface. And they were trying to get the right stuff in the right bucket of the software so that they could load the next trailer, right? What we ended up doing there was actually getting rid of SAP, and we used a SQL database with like a XML or a website interface for the employees, because you could just IDOC in and IDOC out, up and down the supply chain. But in the middle, all I have to do is load this trailer. So all I need to know is what's supposed to be on there, and then like scan as I go, right? And then at the end, just run a report, right? Bounce it off. Here's what I scanned. Here's what I was supposed to scan. And of course, it was about a week. It took the tech silo in that company to write this program, so that it would show up on their RF unit. And it wouldn't let you load the wrong thing, and all of that. So company already had the resources, they were already paying for this technology department, super simple solution. But they just, it wasn't people-centered. They never stopped to think, wait a minute, what about the people doing the work? It was easier to just say, hey, we already use SAP in our organization. We'll just buy another license, set up a computer here that's equidistant from everybody. The decisions were not made really with a view to the people doing the work. And we were able to help them with that. So I think both of those are good examples of things that can happen, unfortunately, kind of easily with companies if we're in a just move fast, get things done mode, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you are asking your people to do more work to feed a system that gives the bosses answers, then you might have a problem there. I was flying back from a client, and I was sitting across from this executive from medical device manufacturing, and he said, we're having a hard time with the ERP system and keeping track of the schedule and keeping track of customer orders and stuff like that. And I said, well, then stop using it. I said, let the processes, schedule themselves, right? So you just need to get kind of that aggregate once in a while and feed that, set it up so that the ERP system takes that as an input instead of every single barcode and it trying to schedule people's like, it just doesn't work that way. That the environment's too dynamic, and you don't want your people spending all that time doing work. And it's funny because same thing with problem solving, right? So we introduce forms to people, right? It's different levels of problem solving. And the mantra is, if it takes longer to fill out the form than it does to solve the problem, then don't use the form. It's the same thing with technology. If it takes more to use the technology to get then to do the value added part of it, then don't use that technology. Find something that the person can actually focus more on value added than all the peripheral stuff.
It's hard with the sunk cost fallacy when you paid $1 million for an ERP solution and it does.
Just muted yourself.
That's definitely staying in.
Oh, was I muted?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't hear you because you were on mute. You want to repeat yourself there, big guy?
Yeah, I would love to. So, I think I fixed.
No,
Let's go completely unmute because you don't have feedback now, right? Because I did have that on. It was because the webcam was on.
we're just technologically impaired. Go ahead,
I
Benny.
know. We brought Sean Driscoll on and we can't figure out Zoom. We're like, we want people-centered improvement, and I can't figure out how to unmute myself for a conversation. We've been doing this every weekend for how long, John?
Long enough.
Long enough for me to figure out a mute button. No, but, what I was saying there was it's a sunk cost fallacy where I spent $1 million on an ERP solution that doesn't work. So I just infinitely keep people stuck in this, well, keep doing this thing that doesn't work because we already spent $1 million on it. Even when like the annual cost of doing so exceed the deployment. I see that time and time again.
Yeah, and they probably overpaid for the implementation anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really help those people. I can tell them, hey, about the sunk cost fallacy. This isn't new. You went to business school. It's not going to change their behaviors necessarily. Jake, I think we're familiar with a employee productivity protocol that got improperly implemented. I mean, the way it was implemented, the people that were working on it clearly didn't understand the theory of what they were trying to do. And it went for months with no outcomes because it mathematically can't. You're missing the key component here. And eventually the company's solution was like to fire the project manager for it. Like, I mean, if you have that kind of culture, I'm not sure I can help you at that point, right?
Yeah, I mean, if business says that you just can't employ this many people before you make any improvements, you've got to make that business decision. But I found attrition is enough for most businesses that as they make improvements, unless you're a heavily service industry or company, labor doesn't really make up that much. And I really like the fixed labor model where you put the onus on the sales part of the organization to say, sell more stuff. Let's create different products with different price points. Let's do something and saturate the market or go into adjacent spaces. Let's get creative that way, because you gain a lot more cash flow and a lot more profit from increasing sales than you do from cutting costs. And that's the other thing. It's interesting is, people are, they're rule followers to a certain degree, right? We come up with these rules on how to interact, and sometimes we formalize them into a policy. And I think policies are good, but people need to look at the informal policies of the company. What do people do when they don't have the answers, or they find a loophole that makes the job easier by still getting the same quality and at the same cost? We did this with an organization that they allowed people to volunteer, and it was a union environment where the union workers weren't allowed to take off during the day to go do that. It was just part of the agreement that they had. But we found out that the unionized workforce was allowed to join managers for team building. So what did they do? Is they had a team building exercise with Habitat for Humanity, right? So they created an informal policy to be able to allow everybody to work together on these type of things. And it's like that through any organization. So, when somebody says this is going really well, it's great to walk around and talk to people and say, what are you doing when you run into this or run into that? And you find out that they've created these ad hoc rules or policies on how to handle this situation. And you want to take those into consideration when you make changes, right? And you mentioned something earlier about the business model, right? So turning the business model into a business system, I think that's the best thing that a company can focus on. I mean, if your people can't get excited about the business system or the brand, right? Adopting anything else, whether it's technology or some improvement methodology, is not going to help. It'll turn into the flavor of the month, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. And the outcomes of any business's implementation of technology is relative to the existing culture and informal processes that are in place, right? So if you have a company where the company implemented some kind of technology and laid off some people. The next time they go to implement technology, the people are going to do their damnedest to make sure that it never works, right?
Mm.
John, do you have any horror stories of companies you've helped where there was some significant cultural hurdles you had to overcome?
Well, yeah, actually, most of them, when I'm called in, for the larger companies. So um, there's something that's going on that's not working the way that they want to, and so it's what are why are the people fighting it, right? And you know, leadership sometimes sees it as, well, they're just being stubborn, or they don't like it, they never tried it, kind of thing. But if you listen to even the naysayers, right, there's a reason why they're saying it, and so you've got to go and talk to the people and figure out what it is that's keeping them from doing it. Sometimes it's, well, if you do that, you're going to lose customers because customers buy from us. So it's interesting that people who are actually creating value have a better sense of the voice of the customer, because they're the ones that get the stuff back if it's not right. Right? Leadership sometimes just gets a report and says, well, we hit it 95% of the time. Well, it's that 5%, and any new changes might actually make that 90 or 80 or 75. And the people doing the work know that.
I recall in a e-commerce shipping facility that the customer was reporting consistently that customers weren't getting their product. So going through our process, our ERP showed that we ship everything on time and full. And then FedEx, even where the product was going before getting dispersed to its location, would show that everything they received, they processed in full and there was no issues. And come to find out that the hidden factory was once a day at about 6 o'clock in the morning, FedEx would bring back a full trailer's worth of unlabeled product. And then the team would hurry up and receive that back into their system for reprocessing to get it back out of the door. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is not a summary of everything we set out not to do as we on our lean journeys.
But I think that's like a classic, Deming's point, the system got what it incentivized. That's the problem with having, quotas and numbers and stuff, right? The employees were doing exactly what the system was designed to incentivize them to do, right?
Yeah, no one metric is sufficient, even if it's a really good metric, because human nature is that we're going to try to find that the least path of resistance, right? We want to do work, we want to create, we want to be productive, but we don't want to be dead tired when we get home, after doing it. So yeah, it's you've got to balance those things out.
John gives a potent aphorism. We had previously worked in a cost plus environment, and in that environment, somebody would always go, well, I don't care what it costs as long as we get it done and serve the customer, whatever it takes to get the product out of the door. And John always makes the McDonald's analogy, and he says, no, we have to get the right product at the right time with the sufficient quality, and all of those factors matter. Because if somebody frisbees you a burger patty out of the door, you're not going to be happy.
Right. Yeah, it's the old, I use this when I'm coaching, mostly frontline workers, right? But I'll constantly hear people pitting quality against efficiency. Well, we can do a good job or we can do a fast job. Pick one. No, hogwash. You don't accept that in your own life. If you go to McDonald's and you order a Big Mac, you expect a Big Mac, not a fillet of fish. But you also expect it to be a fast food restaurant. So you're already demanding that of all of the people you interact with at work. When was the last time that you griped about how long the line was at Walmart? Okay, so if you're allowed to gripe, then our customers are allowed to gripe, right? There's speed or efficiency as well as quality, right? And cost. And we're going to be good at all of them.
Yeah, you've got to figure out what the customer's willing to pay for, right? And not really over deliver on that as well. Because they're not willing to pay for it, and then you've just you've kind of thrown money at something that you're not getting a return on, and the customer's not going to appreciate. So it's doing what the customer needs. There's the Kano model of delight your customers, but what is it that would delight them, right? So if they if they buy because you can consistently get a good quality product or a service to them continuously, you start lowering the price, great, but that's not why I buy from you. And as good as Toyota is, they're still raising their prices, and they figure out what people are willing to pay for. So you want more horsepower? Oh yeah, you're going to have to pay quite a bit for that, and so on and so forth. And so that's just part of business, right? It's figuring out what customers want and what they're willing to pay for, and then you go back and you work on your cost to make sure you can make that profit that you want.
We suffer from that a lot in service industries where scope will naturally creep with, process variation within a business. And we're quick to just keep accepting that scope as it evolves and creeps over time until before you know it, we're doing stuff that had nothing to do with an original contract or anything that's in place. And we keep saying yes instead of, is that even what the customer wants from us, really? And if it is, you're absolutely right. They got to pay for it. Now, if I could just switch subjects for just a moment, Sean, I love that we initially connected over LinkedIn, and you constantly add value to all of our banter that really reflects the guy you are today. And so I've got to ask, in your LinkedIn world, what started that journey where you are all over LinkedIn and I see you all across in the Lean and Six Sigma space. Tell me what's your approach in the social media world?
Well, it's to learn. It's to interact. I think I'll always be learning. I think it's kind of interesting to see how people approach things and the different viewpoints. Not too long ago, I ran across a gentleman by the name of David Teese. He talks about dynamic capabilities. I thought that was really interesting, and he gets into the sensing, right? So how do you sense when something's going to change and then start preparing for it ahead of time? I was working with a working group for one of the undersecretaries of the Air Force on, working with the Air Force culture, the capabilities. And we really got into, what is a capability? And it's competencies plus capacity. And you need both of those things. And so what kind of competencies? So you see a lot of people with competencies, but they're not capable. And why is it, right? Sometimes it's wherewithal. We have the will, but not the willpower to do stuff. Sometimes they don't have the time. I think that's kind of the biggest thing that people fall on. But when people tell me, well, I could do it if I just had the time, but I know people who can do it in that amount of time. So what other part of that capacity are we looking at? Or maybe you're substituting one competency for another. So it's those kind of things. I really like hearing different viewpoints. And I like bantering, being in the military, we're always, giving each other a hard time. And I'm part of a veterans group. We do the same thing there too. They make fun of the Air Force or they make fun of the Marines and, those kind of things. So, there's some business camaraderie, that I look for, not just on LinkedIn, but, and I want to make sure that, if I see something and I don't think it's right, sometimes I've got to say something. But I've learned 3 rules, and this has really helped me out. Is the first one is if I run across something on LinkedIn and I'm like, does someone need to say something about this? Right. And if so, then I say, do I need to say something about this? And if the answer is yes, it's, do I need to say something about this now? And so a lot of times it's like, well, no, it can wait, or I don't need to say anything about this at all. It's got me in a lot of trouble, because my knee-jerk reaction is like, that's, wait a minute, that's not right.
Can you send those 3 rules to every major news organization, please?
That reminds me of a good service member joke. So a soldier, a Marine, and an airman are deployed, and they set up their tent, and this storm comes along and just floods their tents with mud. And the soldier goes, "This is inefficient." The Marine goes, "Cool, I love sleeping in the mud." And the airman goes, "Why is there a tent in my hotel room?"
Yeah, we think of the Air Force as the country club of the Armed Forces.
Yeah.
They're great organization, very smart, but yeah.
Yeah,
So my joke is, what's the difference between God and a 4-star general? God doesn't think he's a 4-star general.
Yeah, a lot of respect for the service members. My brother's in the Army, so I get to hear all of the good service member jokes. So, but bringing it back to people-centered technology improvements. We live in a world that requires technology. So I've worked in very few situations where the company could get away with zero technology. I have worked in a couple where a company could have a viable business without major technology. Obviously, you have to have a phone, and nowadays, even a cell phone is pretty much ubiquitous. Um, but more major technology. So we do live in that world. The challenge is the methodology, the purpose, and the why behind the technology, and taking the time to make sure that technological improvements are actually improving the lives of the people doing the work. So, Sean, do you have experience coaching companies with technology implementation or improvements, where you got to sort of guide them through the process of, hey, let's go to where the work is done and talk to the people doing the work? Tell us a little bit about that.
So manufacturing has always been kind of pragmatic by nature, right? So I've noticed not too long ago, a couple of years, that you had a world-class international manufacturing company that was running a piece of equipment with Windows XP. So they're like, why? It works. It doesn't need upgrades. It's that's so manufacturing has been kind of pragmatic that way. But when people are looking to automate, a lot of times these smaller, mid-sized businesses are like, well, we can't afford it. I mean, what's it really going to do for me? And when you can point out, what the critical, so you have KPIs, right? And everybody loves these KPIs, but behind every KPI is a process that's key. And you find out what about that process that if you made it faster, or you made it more reliable, or you were able to get better quality and maintain or make the safety better, what would that be? And so there are things, and I'm plugged into the technology community here in the Charlotte metro area, is, I understand all these things, and we've used some of these things like edge tier calculations, right? So now NVIDIA and Raspberry Pi have these devices for $100 that will do calculations, not have to run it up to the cloud to do those things. And so they can make those decisions a little bit quicker for somebody. And I think that's, the steps that we look at is, first, is it going to make the job safer? Can it make the job faster? Can it make it so one person can do it when two are required and do it safely, right? And then can the technology do something that humans can't? And then you can take it from there. A lot of times, if you just focus on making it safer and making it quicker with the same quality, or improving the quality more consistently, then you're going to see a bigger benefit from that. And the payback is immediate. And so that's one of the things that we look at, is we make sure that our clients get the payback within a month's time for a lot of this stuff. They don't have to, wait 2 years to get their payback on it. The other companies, you can buy kind of a package deal to go with stuff, but it's usually spending time with the people on taking some of the waste out and making those processes more repeatable, and taking it as far as you can with the people that you have and the technology you have. Then you know exactly what technology to add to it. With that pharma company, we were able to take a lot of the sensors off, right? And then focus on, how the machine is set up, and then training people on that. And then the sensors were geared towards, is the machine set up like the way it's supposed to? Did it creep out? Did someone change it when they weren't supposed to, kind of thing? And then that's set, and then you can move on to the next thing. There's one very large company, and I respect them very much, so I'm not going to give the name, but they wanted me to help them sell to the small and mid-sized businesses. And they had this kind of briefcase with a laptop and software in it, and it showed, how all their devices could work together. And I said, well, what's the starting point for this automated system? And they said, it's like $250,000. I said, you'll never get into a small and mid-sized business that way. You've got to make it more. I said, what's the cheapest component you have? And they said, well, it's this edge tier router we have. It's $2,000. I go, that's the starting point. If you can show a business how to use that, right, to gain some, then you've got the snowball rolling downhill, and then you can start building off of that. some companies can take those prepackaged systems and do fine with them, but most businesses, I think, are going to run into problems, and it'll be kind of one of those things stuck off to the side that, like, yeah, we run that, when we have a chance.
Yeah, for you to call out a 30-day ROI is astounding. Like I haven't seen a technology solution that had a well-defined 12-month ROI. So I like the approach that you have to have a deliverable amount of value for this to even make sense. Like that just makes logical sense.
Yeah, and the way that technology is, it's easier, and it's so much easier to put stuff together. Before, you'd have to buy all one brand or one type to do it, but now you've got these Industry 4.0 technologies that it'll read Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, landline, Cat5, any signal you send to it, it'll be able to take it and turn it into whatever you want it to do. Whether it's counting or it's taking visual images and checking it against the database to make sure that that's what the product or the information is supposed to look like.
John, we made it 40 minutes in without saying Industry 4.0. There it was.
God damn it. Lost that bet. So good segue into kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about on this subject, and that is as technology gets more complex, the solutions are more and more out of the box. That can be because the technological knowledge is not a core competency of the company consuming the technology, or other factors where trying to build something from scratch just isn't feasible. So ERP or WMS is the classic example. Like there's not a lot of companies building a WMS. But that's true of pretty much all our technology solutions. So we run into this problem and all the time, which is the technology does determine the process to a certain extent, and can even be a barrier to sort of the best process for creating value. So talk to me a little bit about that, where a company has to use some technology. It's not ideal, and how you deal with it and how the company sort of feels and thinks and acts around that.
Yeah, so the first thing is that, the companies are building these bigger, they're going for this AI system, Watson of sorts. But I think also that technology has made it easier for people to buy it themselves and use it themselves. Worked with a company that was doing aluminum casting. So they had a foundry, sand castings, and they would take it into a CNC shop and then do it to GM or Ford specifications, right? And so this is for vacuum forming and those type of things. And GM's only accepting 3D scans now. They're not doing the CMM, the computer doing the points, to make sure that the mold's to spec. This company is able to buy 3D cameras and put it on every single CNC machine and scan it. And so they can scan it as they're machining it to get it to spec. That's fine. That's a lot better than somebody, that they were talking to that was like, well, we're going to have to set up this cloud service, and then we're going to have these computers, that are going to do these calculations, and and then we're going to have to train your people on how to do this stuff. I think that the flip side of it is that there's some stuff that you can put together yourself. And to me, that goes along the lines of, once you understand your people, process, and technologies, and where the triggers and the key points are for creating that value, then what kind of technology you can build off of. And if you need to retrofit machines, I know somebody who's a IoT geek, and he really geeks out on this stuff. He can measure anything, to get the result you want. Humidity, vibrations, sound, light, pictures, whatever it is. So you can retrofit stuff. And then when you're ready to buy that $1 million piece of equipment, you know exactly what you want from it. You don't have to buy this in case that happens. So that puts the power into the business, the company's hands. They're not relying on somebody who's the technology expert so much that they can start telling them what they want.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that we do have to upgrade our technology. It's a non-negotiable, whether it's retrofitting or replacement. I'm reminded of the McLaren F1. at the time was a mind-blowing supercar, Gordon Murray. And the only way to fix it is with a compact laptop that has hardware inside of it, which in 1991 or whatever, when the car came out, it was a cutting edge laptop. Now it looks like a boat anchor, and you can't get it, and it only runs off of, Windows 3 point something, like it's almost a telegraph machine. And I believe McLaren has already created a solution or was working on it, but these laptops were selling for like $30,000 on eBay because it was the only way to keep your multi-million dollar, supercar running. So it's a good example of, at some point you do have to change, you're going to have to evolve. The question is whether you do it in a people-centered way, that actually helps the folks doing the work to execute the value add process, or if you don't. And I think that's an easy pitfall. As a business manager, you have your conferences, right? Your technology conferences, maybe your ProMat, all of these sales channels to make you aware of potential solutions. And if you don't have a really good grasp of how the value is created, at the point of creation, at Gemba, I think it can be easy to pull the trigger on something, and then get a few months in and realize that, AGVs are not the right material for this clamp only paper products warehouse.
Yeah.
Sorry, little inside joke there, Sean.
Yeah, it happens all the time. The executive or the boss, the owner of the company goes and he goes to these trade shows and it's like, that we could use that because that's going to help us do such and such. But every company, produces value uniquely. I mean, whether it's, you even look at pizza restaurants, right? Or pizza, the chains that they all do it differently, right? And you get a different result from it. It's the same thing with car manufacturing or anything that people make. If they're making the same thing, they're not going to make it the same way. And so you've got to be sensitive to that and what's crucial. One of the things that, you have the conversations with, with the leadership is that when you come in the morning, what do you know? Are you comfortable with that? It's going to be fine. And what are the things that you're more concerned about, right? So it's the stuff that you're concerned about is the things that you need to start improving on. And the stuff that you are comfortable with are potentials for automation, right? If it's been consistent and people are going consistently, then maybe you're able to kind of close that loop for them and then free that person up. But we also make sure that the people are trained on how to use that technology. So they go from actually maybe doing the work to actually working on the machines that do the work. And that keeps everybody employed. But that's, our model is to fix labor, right? So if you've got 500 people, then when we're done, you're going to have 500 people. But your costs are going to be down, you're going to have better quality, and you're going to have new customers.
Yeah, I like the imminent, practicality of that. And I think any level of the organization or education can grasp that. If you're comfortable with it, that's a good candidate for automation. If you're not, probably shouldn't touch it. It's probably out of control, unstable, right? Automation is going to just compound your headaches. So great conversation and comments on people-centered technology improvements. Sean Driscoll, president of Driscoll Organizational Solutions. We really appreciate you joining us this week. How can folks get in touch with you?
Well, I've got a presence on LinkedIn. You visit our website at driscollsolutions.com. And, you can give us a call at 803-431-7810.
All right. And it is Sean, right? Because I've been saying CN for the longest time.
Well, that depends on which side of the Atlantic you were born on, love.
Sorry, Paul, for what John just did there.
Now, you can tell that Paul is from Scotland originally by the way he says good.
Huh?
But he's picked up that Aussie accent pretty good, but it still comes out a little bit.
So did he move down to Australia?
Yeah, I think it's been a while. He just got his naturalized citizenship down there. So
One of my clients, he says he's from England, but the way he talks, he's Scottish. And so I talked to someone else, and they're like, "Well, he's in northern England."
yeah,
Scottish.
he's 2 feet south of that line on the map.
Yeah.
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 Definitely. Well, Sean, it was a pleasure having you here today. For everybody out there in YouTube land, be sure to check out Sean Driscoll and Driscoll Organizational Solutions, especially if you have a technology issue that you need help with. Sean, we really appreciate your expertise. For all of our listeners and fans out there, goodbye.